Welcome back to the Change Physician podcast. This is Melissa Cady, the Challenge Doctor, with my co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro. We're here for the 100th episode, but we're going to do a little spin on it, literally. We have multiple trailers and some that you haven't seen yet that we want to share with you and give you some of the best from the past year with our fun time with the podcast before we venture on into this personal development route with the podcast. Any words you'd like to share before we spin the reel of all these trailers? And yeah.
No, but I would just say is this last year, because we've been going a year now, it has been a journey for me, and I think for you as well. And so it's exciting to me is that we've met so many incredible physicians over the course of the year doing just absolutely amazing things. People that you want to connect with, that you would love to talk to on a frequent basis. And so what this episode is sort of like pulling off the words of wisdom from those guests and bringing them in to kind of put together the 100th episode where we have our words of wisdom from our previous guests. And it's exciting, and it's a good way to start off for the next 100 episodes.
So enjoy.
On with the show.
I know there were people even in my medical school class felt like they had gone too far and they needed to do something else. And I would tell them, hey, you're just getting started. Go do it now. If medicine is not the kind of field that you just do, it's something you do because you love, which technically we should all be doing what we love anyway.
Right.
Which kind of will come back to later, the concept of changing direction in life is not tragic, but losing passion is. Well, of course, you know, as surgeons, we're not always right, but we're never in doubt. There was no question in my mind that whatever I needed to learn to do, it wasn't going to be as complicated as repairing calcific aortas that would fall apart when you put a needle into them and people started bleeding profusely. Mm-hmm. So I knew that much. I knew that I could do it in a part-time basis in little cracks of time, and that it wouldn't necessarily take away from my practice, but rather enhance my practice.
I have this plan. You go into medical school, and then something happens, but you don't really know what medicine is like until you are in medical school. Like, I don't care what anybody says. Oh, I've done this. I mean, I shadowed some guy for like 2 years and did all this stuff, and you don't know until you're in it. You just don't know. And so being able to keep your head above water and to focus on your family through that process, and because I see people struggling, we struggled. I know people who've had kids out, once they finish residency, and then they're trying to juggle this thing because now they have this whole career thing, and then they're trying to figure out where the kids fit in, and if you just really have to know what your priorities are. So, yeah,
it is really hard to juggle all those things. I mean, thankfully for me, like my life has always been medical field, and it's really refreshing to talk to you guys like this because most of the time I have these podcast interviews there with non-medical people. So I'll say things that really don't mean anything to these other folks, but like, you understand that medicine in general can take more than you can give. And oftentimes we as physicians use our job as our calling in life. And so your entire world revolves around your career, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But for me, it was not my calling in life to be a doctor. My calling is to be a daddy. My calling is to be a spouse for my wife, and my career comes second. And so I've always really tried to prioritize that as much as I can. And obviously there's times I failed dismally and the job took over, and, 30-hour shifts and weeks on end without days off. And, it wasn't optimal, but it was always in the, my heart that the job is second.
Really understanding perfectionism and imposter syndrome. So there's a lot of literature that's coming out about perfectionists. And newsflash, if you're in medicine, you're a perfectionist. And the thing is, you can either be an adaptive perfectionist and use it as your superpower, or you can be a maladaptive perfectionist and let it continue to burn you out. And so recognizing that that's my superpower. That's one of my superpowers, that I can use this for greater good, or I can let this continue to eat away with me was a super important thing for me. Leaning into tendencies, and instead of always judging myself, like, oh, I'm wrong to feel this way, or other people will think bad of me if I express myself in this way. And understanding that that's part of imposter syndrome. Like that, oh, I'm not good enough because I'm not like everyone else, or I don't belong.
You just gotta keep your head down and get through it. I started out a little more uppity, but that's just not the way. You know, medicine is a real kind of rigid hierarchy, kind of almost kind of military. Like for those of us who've been through medical training, such that there's no questioning from below. It doesn't matter if you're right. You know, you just don't make your attendings look bad. You don't, kind of one up. And so really it's about, look, I know the science, and I just got to, get through this so that I can practice medicine the way I know best. And, that's the thing about, being a clinician in the States. I mean, we have tremendous freedom to practice any way we want, and to the detriment sometimes, because we got some crazy doctors out there. But I mean, if you're in private practice, you can essentially, practice medicine the way you want. So it's just a matter of getting the degree, getting through postgraduate medical training to be able to practice the way I knew would help my patients the most.
You can be an attending in a hospital. You can run your own practice. You could be on a boat somewhere, being a medical doctor for cruises. I mean, cruise right now is not a good idea, but I'm just saying, you could do anything with this degree. Seriously, the opportunities are so vast. And a lot of us are in this small mindset of, ooh, well, I better sit here and, do what I'm told. And, like you just follow this sort of path, and everyone just feels like you just got to do this one thing.
Anyone who has a weight problem struggles with it. And the bigger the weight problem, the bigger the struggle. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we even say it's not as much as what they're eating as what's eating them.
Yes.
And while that's partially true, it's not always true. Sometimes it's just habit. And for me, growing up in an Italian family, that's what it was. It was habit. You ate when you were happy. You ate when you were sad. You ate when people came over. You ate when you were alone. It's part of the culture. And many cultures have that. They just have different types of food that it's their culture. But growing up with that, I think that was really just a habit that was so ingrained, it was hard to break. And it's been said that the chains of habit are too weak to feel until they're too hard to break. And that's really what it kind of was. And most often it's not until we find something more important in our life to replace
the body that I have. People will say things like, I hear these comments all the time. Well, it's easy for you. You're fit. Okay. Pardon me, but that's bullshit. If I didn't do the work, I wouldn't be fit, right? So it's not easy for me. It's hard for me just like everybody else. I enjoy it. That may be different. I'm just an average guy with perhaps above average ambition, but I am committed. And that's important. Dedication and commitment and intensity outweigh motivation and inspiration 10 out of 10 times. You're going to wake up some morning, you're not going to have the motivation or the inspiration. Get up anyway. If you're committed, you'll do it. Consistency is the key. It's hard for everybody. Number two, I don't spend 6 hours in the gym every day. I spend an hour a day. Sometimes if I'm leaning out or I have an event coming up, or if there's something that's, above and beyond what I normally do, then yeah, I'll spend maybe 2 hours a day to get some extra cardiovascular work in, but I'm not spending 6 hours a day in the gym. So if I can do it as a physician, as a dad, and I've got 3 other jobs too, if I can do it, you can do it. I'm not special. Know a lot. They go through lots of training, lots of school, but we don't know everything, and that is okay. I can't count the number of times in a day in clinic I tell people I don't know exactly what's wrong, but I think it's this, right? So that happens in our jobs. Why wouldn't it happen outside of our jobs? It's okay to say, I don't really know how to do a snatch. I'm not really sure what a hack squat is. I don't know how much I should be lifting or running or whatever. I'm not exactly sure what my nutrition value or my nutrition needs to be. So it's okay to get help. And I think that in looking for a coach, it is really important to find someone who has credentials and who has experience and understands anatomy and physiology, because you do know a lot, right? So the gym that I work out at, and I'm the medical director for the gym, and I oversee all the personal trainers, and I help with like a personal training clients. So the people will come in and say, well, I've had a rotator cuff tear, or I have Crohn's disease, or I've got diabetes, or whatever, and I want to work out, I want to get in shape. And so I'll help the trainers, and they'll say, well, he's got this. And I'll say, well, in that case, change these things, and they ought to be just fine. And then we work back and forth. And our gym has per capita more physicians than any other gym I've been to working out in that setting, because they're getting the type of coaching that's, number one, educated, reasonable, goal-oriented, and flexible for their schedules. And so it's really cool to walk in the gym and see a bunch of colleagues, a bunch of people that I recognize from the hospital. And it creates an environment of professionalism, and it creates an environment of, maybe just that next level of credibility, that the coaches are actually helping someone who has a higher degree, a physician has a higher degree than the personal trainers, but they're able to work together in coming into a common goal. So I think it's absolutely okay to learn from somebody else who may not have the same level of degree that you have, but maybe they don't know as much, but they might know a lot about a little that can really help you in some of the gaps that you have. So I think getting a coach and helping with nutrition and exercise is
when
really
I allowed
good.
myself to be open-minded and dig a little deeper, you realize that, there's more choices, there's more pathways, as opposed to what others have been doing. You know what I'm saying? So as long as you're open and you look earnestly for these different choices, you can go down and see what will work for you. And then, long story short, I spent 4 years in locum tenens. I practiced in 4 different states in various different types of settings. And through that, I, said to myself, this is what I want to do. And you just it's kind of like, Michelangelo, the Renaissance artist, and though, he would do a sculpture, right? What he's actually doing is that, he's just chipping away the pieces that are not supposed to be there, right? As opposed to having a picture of what
in the middle of nowhere. Like, I'm going to have to move my family if I want to do some of these opportunities. I didn't really want to jump into pharma or like medical writing. I did not know. I literally told my husband, I will go work at a grocery store and check out groceries if that's what we have to do, but not this. I can't do this anymore. And I remember him asking, like, what's so bad about it, Erin? Like, it's family medicine, like sneezes and diabetes. But I was like, you don't understand. There's like so much more to it than that. And so realizing that not really anybody could relate to me, I'm the only female physician in my whole county here in Indiana. So it's not like I could just go next door and talk to a neighbor who understood. I found a physician coach because I was like, you know what? I'm not crazy. I don't think I'm broken. I don't know where to go. So let's try this coaching thing. And started working with her. And it was through that process, Melissa, that I reconnected with curriculum. Like the things that aren't the learning objectives when you go on rotations, those are the things that I was starting to like gather in. And knowing that I really wanted to stay close to home, those were messages that I started to take into my heart. Like, be smart, but don't be too smart. Look nice, but don't look too nice as a female physician. And some of those other things like never be the first one to go home, or make sure you're always asking more questions, or you need to be reading up until like 10 or 11 p.m. and like forget about sleep, and you're not done until like the last patient is taken care of. Some of those, like, I'm going to say like pathological traits as a physician that then led me into burnout, I think started in those 3rd and 4th years, because I was trying to excel so much, because I wanted to be the quote unquote best doctor that I could
was
be.
spending a lot of time with patients, and that's not cost effective in our modern day practice, right? And telling them the basics over and over again. But I could say, here, I created this 1 hour Feel Good, Look Good Secrets webinar. Listen to it when you come back in to go over your lab results. The patients that listened to it and had questions for me, I could spend time on. They've already bought in. They know I can, the supplements, the hormones, the testing, all of that, they bought in. Those that didn't, thank you. See you next year for your next pap smear.
And I'm sure there's maybe somebody listening to that and think that's harsh, but I'm sitting here smiling because it's what I love about it is you've leveraged technology. You're actually providing a value added service through creating a free or whatever type of program you're creating, something that they can consume on demand at their own pace. Mm-hmm. And if they're not willing to invest, you have actually served them better because they're making a choice not to. And then you're sparing them time, and you're sparing basically sort of reaffirming is that your words matter. And so if you're going to take some time as a physician to use your words, which you're going to influence whoever you're with, no matter what you say, you've actually, in your practice, you took the time to identify which words you wanted to use and string them together in such a way that optimized the outcome for your patients, no matter what you're doing. What I mean by that is if you're a physician in a practice, we've identified a couple different things in this interview, which are just fantastic. If you're saying something over and over again, create a program on it. If you're going to be saying these things and you're pre-opping somebody, then pay a little bit of attention to the words that you're stringing together, because that's another opportunity for health and healing here, rather than, the typical your scrub before surgery. And I just love how you're basically identifying all these points where with a little bit of foresight and a little bit of effort, a physician can have a significant impact on the health of their basic model that you're using.
So I would say mine is just sort of a traditional direct primary care practice. So by that, I mean 500 to 600 patients is probably pretty typical, somewhere between 500 and 700 patients. A monthly fee that covers any clinical care that I provide. So that could be a traditional office visit. It could be a virtual visit, Zoom, like we're doing now. It could be a house call. It could be a phone call. It could be a text message. So any professional services that I'm going to provide to a patient are included in that monthly fee. And the monthly fee is, I would think we would call it affordable. Now, everybody's got a different idea of what's affordable, but I think most direct primary care practices, on average, if you look at different age groups, probably about $75 a month, thereabouts, for comprehensive primary care. And then as far as the model beyond that, most doctors try to provide extra value on top of that if they can. And I talked about some of those in our prior interview, where we take advantage of things like physicians being able to dispense medications in the office and offering that as a value to patients, because we can purchase medications wholesale and dispense them in the office, save the patient going to the pharmacy and paying a marked up price for the medication. Most direct primary care clinics also find a local lab that they can establish a relationship with, so that they can get cash price labs at a big discount for their patients. So that's my model, which is as many things as I can put into the monthly fee, we do. And, there are things like EKGs and pulmonary function testing, things that we do in primary care that have a little bit of expense for the doctor on the front end, like an EKG machine or something along those lines, but they're not that high. And we've thrown all of that into the bundle of the primary care membership. And then we've, like most primary care clinics that do this, look for any other opportunities to save people money, because, the reason that we're doing direct primary care is to offer like a more intense level of care, which is a time component, but then also affordable care, because we want patients to get both, while we're at the same time being satisfied with the job.
And to be able to control our time, I think, is one of the critical aspects of anyone's life, because we say that you can always invest money and make more money, but with time, you can never generate more time. Our time is sort of a fixed hourglass, and we don't know where we stand in that, in the full sand at the top. And so we really need to make the best of it. So I think the impact on the number of lives, it got to the point really where I started to slowly drift out of my practice. In other words, first I stopped working Fridays, then I stopped working Thursday and Friday. And so I don't feel like I really left what my calling had always been, which was to help people and to help them be healthier. It's just in a slightly different way that I'm doing it. And I'm doing it more upstream than surgery. surgery still interests me tremendously from the just what you're doing. It's interesting. It's rewarding to see immediate gratification when you remove an appendix and someone's better the next day or a few hours later.
Like realizing your power, you always have the power to walk away. Now, are there going to be consequences? Sure, there's consequences with any decision, but you always have the power to walk away. And I remember my coach telling me that because I felt so stuck and so trapped. She was like, you can always walk away. And I'm like, no, I can't. I signed this contract for 3 years. Like, I have a 3-year commitment. And she's like, you can always walk away. And reminding yourself of that. And so I think that's like the external view, like really getting granular about your locus of control, knowing you can always walk away, and then realizing what are you tolerating? What's the bullshit in your life that you're tolerating? And is that your bullshit? And if it's not, then coming up with high quality solutions for which to change that.
Digital assets are working for you to help connect you with people that might be interesting. So someone right now in America might be reading a blog post that I've written or an email newsletter or a tweet or a YouTube video and might be thinking, oh, this is interesting, and might want to reach out to me. Like there's so many opportunities for serendipity that happen when you stop putting yourself out there online. And if you don't, then you're kind of confining your network of people to the village effectively that you're born into. And you're not venturing outside the village. And because of the internet, it's because of the internet that we're connecting now on, we're going to become friends and stuff. And, this stuff wouldn't have happened if I hadn't put myself online. And if you guys didn't have this podcast where you're sort of actively putting yourselves out there. So I'm just like hugely bullish on the fact that I think everyone should have a personal blog. A lot
of people don't really understand their motives for going into medicine. Medicine has the promise of, it's a noble career. It promises stability and a position in society, and maybe a safety and some calm that some people never had when they were children. And being a refugee, that was a perfect antidote to that dehumanization that one feels when they're a refugee. And so I think underneath it, I didn't even know that subconsciously, perhaps what pushed me to it was not just this humanitarian goal, which seems all noble and wonderful, but it was this need to become respected, to go for that safety, which ultimately you may not find in a career that is very difficult and can be very challenging. And so that's a trap for a lot of people who had difficult childhoods. But with that, in parallel, humans are complex, brains are complex. You can never have one singular goal or desire. It's always, there always has to be conflict, right?
I love to travel pre-COVID. I'm a violinist. And so I love taking lessons with my teacher who plays for the symphony here. And then writing, granted, it's probably only you guys and my mom and dad that read it, but I like to do a lot of freelance writing. And I found a few venues to get to do that, to talk about kind of what I do and really kind of what your mission is, I think, too, of saying, you don't have to be in an unhappy position. You can find a way to be happy. You don't have to be trapped in something, but I don't think the answer is just to quit. I've never found a job where more people are trying to not do the job. It's crazy. You spent all your life sacrificing for it, and then all of a sudden you're miserable, and you see the really dark sides of that misery, of stress, of substance abuse, and for a really good cause. And so I think there are other ways to go, and I think people should explore.
Because I had a couple of really, really bad experiences, a few losses with moms and a few losses with babies that traumatized me to no end. And that was the part where I was like, man, this is way more than I signed up for. It's not what it's cracked out to be. And the amount of time spent away from home, like just, it's incredible. Like, yeah, you work 80 hours a week, but then you've got didactics and lectures that you're studying for, board exams you're studying for, committee meetings you've got to go to, then you're prepping for, after boards, you're prepping for fellowship interviews, and like there's just no end to it. And that was definitely, your question was there a point where I was like, hey, there's something wrong here? Like, yeah, it was like, about halfway through intern year when I hit that first OB rotation really alone. But if it wasn't for my co-resident understanding what type of problem I was having, like he knew I was in big trouble, and because he'd been there, and then him helping me get in to see our psychologist, I think that was a real saving grace for me. But the truth is, like, they say things like, if you need help, if you need a personal day, if you need, here's the suicide hotline, give them a call. At the end of that conversation, they're going to be like, okay, Well, you're good, right? You're heading into shift today, right? You have these traumatic experiences, and you lose somebody in the ER, you know, and you know you're running a code, and they lose, and you lose, and you go out and tell the family what had happened, and then you're expected to go and see the next patient who's got otitis media in the room next door, and have this happy face on and act like nothing's wrong, and you become kind of cold and callous so that you can get through the job. But then in your quiet time, then the demons come back in, and like I was able to hold it together around people, but then when I was alone is when it would all kind of come shattering.
So I guess for the listeners out there, and thanks for Caleb for bringing this up, is just to remember that to support each other, and that if you see one of our, because I think you're lucky also on your residency or fellowship.
Oh yeah.
Because there's some residencies that, you know, I've seen people who are isolated and there's no one talking to them, and the only people who really can or have the chance to reach out to is their colleagues. So yeah, that's well, this went in different places.
Yeah, sorry, that's probably not what you guys had planned, but yeah, no, that's not something I've actually talked about at all with anybody. You know, other than just those people. Like I haven't had an opportunity to talk about it, you know, in this way at all. And you know, now that I'm just kind of thinking about it, yeah, I really am grateful in a lot of ways that, number one, we had a clinical psychologist that was someone I trusted. You know, that's a huge thing. You got to be able to trust them. The fact that I, you know, had someone who cared enough about me to say, you know, I'm not just going to blow.
Why don't I teach courses for these exams, which is a fairly standard idea that a lot of medical students have these days. But I think the key thing is when I had the idea, I also realized that, hang on, I don't just need to run this course at my local mosque for like 5 kids. I can actually make a pretty looking website and I can just market it nationally and let's see what happens. And that was kind of the first business that really started to take off. I'd been dabbling in kind of trying to make money online through high school. Nothing had ever worked. But then this business, like all of those failures, culminated in teaching me the skills that I needed, you know, right place, right time, right circumstances. And this started to take off. So in our first year, we had like 100 students. And the next year we had 1,000 students. And the third year we had 2,000. And so this was making a pretty decent sum of money. Like I think I was taking home a salary of like 30 or 40,000 pounds each year of med school, which was absolutely insane because that's like basically more than a doctor.
Our own grieving. It was my own willingness to let each day, you know, be lived like the day before. And so, and to grieve, and honestly to allow myself time to grieve, and at a tremendous financial risk, right? Walking away from your practice. Will your clients be there when you get back? I would just say they will be. They will be. You know, the moment I returned, that was like I hadn't left. And, you know, and that's a nice thing to know if you're taking a sabbatical. I think it's really, if you feel like in your heart you need a sabbatical, you have to.
At the time we first saw him, a thing called pulse volume. And I was so focused on his heart, I totally forgot about his leg until 10 months after working with him. One day in the office visit, he said, "Dr. Esselstyn, do you recall when I first started seeing you, I had to stop 5 times crossing the sky by your office?" He said, "You know, in the last month or two now, the pain began to go away and now it's gone." I said, "Well, back you go to the vascular lab." So then I have this slide that shows the new pulse volume was absolutely doubled. And this was an absolute eureka moment for us because this was in 1986. This was a year before the statins came out. So anybody who said, "Well, Dr. Esselstyn, that was probably the statin." No. We had absolute rock solid, irrefutable proof that food and food alone could absolutely reverse cardiovascular disease. Because many physicians say that they've tried it and their patients won't do it. It's too severe, strict, or extreme. Well, that's nothing farther from the truth. Because when you think about lifestyle change, the only way you're going to get lifestyle change, to me, is to show the patient respect. And the only way to show a patient respect is to give them your time. If you think that you're going to get a patient in a 12 or a 15-minute office visit to transition their lifestyle, forget it. Our seminar is 5.5 to 6 hours, where the patients are going to learn all about how they have created their disease and precisely how we are going to empower them as the locus of control to halt and reverse their disease.
I hated medical school. Oh God, it was terrible. The first 2 years were a nightmare. I don't know if I could go through that again.
Yeah.
Now I also went to an institution that had grades. They had class rankings. They separated you out into curves, and they've changed all that now. It's a great institution, but they've gotten rid of all that. And I think that really made for a very malignant, tough atmosphere to be a student in. But yeah, I think you really lose yourself those first year or two. Thankfully, I took some time off and I was a little older going in. And so I had a little more perspective that as long as you pass, you're still going to be a physician. It does not matter. You sort of clear that biggest hurdle. And I think going into medical school, they really do everything they can to help you stay in medical school. Because by no means did I have an easy time my first 2 years. I was drowning with information.
I have, OCD, you know what I'm saying? And I'm very vulnerable in sharing that. And it's part of, you know, being a person, being a human being. And the more vulnerable you are, the more other people can relate to you. And that's how we connect with one another as people. You know, that's how we connect, you know, as a physician to a patient, because at the end of the day, we are people. You know, I just wear a lab coat, you know, so it's, you know, life experiences teaches you, you know, to really mold yourself, and it really tests you. And at the end of the day, it's more about self-awareness. And, you know, when giving a certain decision or an event or something, some obstacle, you have a choice. You know, do you face it or you don't? You know, do you bow down or do you leave? You know, and there's no right or wrong to it. It's just making a choice and being okay with what happens. The book is going to hit more people, you know, reach out to more people than I can do in 4 walls. A podcast can reach, you know, more people than I can do in 4 walls. And so that's the point of it, is to create a ripple effect, is to, you know, touch others, to turn on a light bulb, to make them think differently, you know, and let them, you know, have a choice in the matter. Because in order to live the best version of your life, you have to be given out all these different choices, you know? So if I didn't have locums as a choice, you know, my life would have been entirely different.
Where my journey went was figuring out, like, okay, not this. What do I want? What do I not want? And what will I no longer tolerate in my life? And then how do I curate that? And that was a really interesting portion of coaching. But what I needed is I needed to give myself that, like, open space to be creative and to, like, figure out those answers again. Because medicine, we get set on the railroad tracks, and it's like stop 1, station 1, med school, boom, residency, fellowship, boom, attending job, boom. But really in the real life, it's more like walking in the woods and just, like, finding a trail and seeing where it goes. And that you have the freedom to get off the railroad tracks and to just go around in the trail. And so that was the fun part and the interesting and the totally scary part of, like, giving myself time to, like, breathe and think and figure it out. No way I should have ever expected myself that I was going to go to the same office every single week for the next 30 years of my life. Like, that's just not who I am. Like, I like to change up different types of coffee every single morning. So why would I think that, like, that was all that I was going to do for my life? So now I still have a little doctor-shaped hole in my heart, so I still practice medicine, but it's totally on my terms and in the way that I want to practice. And then I'm also doing coaching, and I do a little consulting, and I do podcasting. And, oh, by the way, I'm a farmer's wife, so I'll be in a tractor, you know, later on this week, helping him, like, get corn in. Or I got the 3 kids. And so I think it was really about, like, embracing, like, this is me. This is me. So stop trying to fit myself in a hole that isn't me. And instead, like, let's just stand out and be like, this is it. Love it or leave it. And the great thing is I had a super
hindsight, obviously it was the best thing that could ever happen in my entire life. Like, I'm so grateful for that. But of course, in that moment, I'm like, oh crap. Like, I just, you know, you just have my income. And I remember, like, running to my computer and updating my CV and emailing people. And I had to literally stop myself and be like, what if this was a good thing? Yeah. You know, what if I could embrace this? What if I could just make this work? You know? Yeah. And I did. Yeah. So I you know, you can't take back the CVs, but, you know, I stopped my search. You know, the more I study about marketing and social media, you know, I hear the progression, know, like, trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
So someone knows you, right? Like they meet you and they know you and they grow to like you, and then you provide them value and they grow to trust you. And then when they're ready to whatever, buy a product, have their own direct sales business, whatever, have a question, then they trust you enough to come to you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, that's life in general, right? Like that's, if someone has a problem, they come to you because they know, like, and trust you, you know? And that's what a good marketer does, you know, for anything.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you provide the value so that you become trusted.
I hung up my lab coat and for my spacesuit, I guess, and just focused on that. But it's a great preparation for what I ended up doing as an astronaut. It's the mindset, it's the teamwork, it's the clinical approach to, you know, finding a diagnosis. You know, it's that inquisitiveness that you know, really served me well. And of course, you know, a medical degree is such a great tool for a lot of different, you know, careers. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a CEO of a tech startup company, and so I've built a team around some of my innovations, and all the things that I learned as a physician, you know, working in multidisciplinary teams and being inquisitive have served me really, really well, even in my day job today.
Keep in mind as they are making their decisions is think about your family. Think about when you want to start your family. A lot of women, friends of mine who were pre-med, there was not on our radar, you know, oh, I don't want to have a kid, you know, that's not really that important. But it really is. And it really hits you when you're in fellowship and all of these things are happening at the same time. It's really hard for women. There's this clock ticking. And this is so important, so important. And people seem to ignore it so much. And so think about medicine as a career and motherhood. I mean, I'm not trying to, but for men also, I mean, do you want to be a good father? Do you want to be a present father in the life of this child? So, and then think about who you are and your spirituality. Like, you know, I wanted to become, I was always very athletic and I wanted to become maybe semi-professional, maybe a triathlete. And that goal I never reached. Medicine just does not allow you to reach certain goals outside of medicine. And so think hard about whether you want to do medicine at all. And then if you do medicine, go in it knowing what to expect, that there's going to be hard years ahead with very little time for yourself, much less for your family. And so pick a specialty that it fits you and your personality better. Don't ignore yourself in the process until the system changes. And I don't know if that will ever happen. Maybe, you know, if more people speak their minds and are true to themselves and value their health and their time off and their autonomy a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a really tough thing. I had a really good friend in residency who wanted to have a baby, and I can remember just seeing how poorly she was treated because they were like, well, if you have a baby, you know, you're going to be out on your internal medicine rotation, which means someone's going to have to cover for you. And, you know, who's going to take the 24-hour call shifts? And it's like, are you kidding me? Like, if I'm going to keep the derogatory things that I said down, but man, we let them have it. Like we stood up for her big time. Was like, look, she's got every right to do whatever she wants with her life. And this does not take priority over her having a baby. But you're right. There's like this level of expectation that whether it's said or unsaid, it's the culture of medicine that is absolutely not focused on our wellness. Some of the most unhealthy people I've ever met have been the folks, you know, with MD and DO behind their name.
Yeah, absolutely.
Doctor, but your book recommendations aren't Robin's pathology. So how important is it to you to read outside of medicine, or how valuable has that been to you over your career so far?
Oh God, I can't even put an ROI on it. Like, these days, if someone recommends a book, I will just buy it without looking at the price tag, just because, you know, the amount of value you could possibly get from a book is astronomical. Like, you know, I think I illegally downloaded the 4-Hour Workweek, but then I later ended up buying it for like, you know, £7. And that book's completely changed my life and may help me set up like a 7-figure business. And it's just absolutely insane how much value you can get from a single book. And the other thing I always kind of recommend to people is that Audible is like the single, like if I could only subscribe to one thing in the world, it would be Audible, because the amount of audiobooks you can get through when you're like commuting to work, or if you're on the train, or if you're at the gym, it's just, again, absolutely insane. And there's so much good stuff that I've gifted most often is a little book by a guy called Austin Kleon, and it's called Show Your Work. And it's like this thing, it's for people listening, it's about 2 centimeters or an inch thick. It takes about half an hour to read. And it's a very short book. It's, very small, kind of like a pamphlet. And he basically argues for why everyone should have a blog and should be sharing their work online. And he argues that, we all have this thing where, I'm not enough of an expert, or why would anyone care what I have to say? And, who's going to read my stuff? But he argues that if at least one person in the world could possibly benefit from what you have to say, then you, in a way, have a moral obligation to do so. And that was the book that in 2016 I read and made me set up my own blog, which was ultimately the thing that led to my YouTube channel forming. So I always keep multiple copies of this in my apartment, and anytime someone comes over and someone's like, "Oh, I've been thinking of doing this online thing," I just whip out a copy and just give it to them. You're like, "Guys, you've got to read this. This is the one."
No, I'm not a Superman. Right now there's a lot of t-shirts that say like superheroes work here, and it's got the medical professional and the mask. I don't want to be a superhero. Like I want to show up and be the best physician that I can. But when you get into superhero thinking, then you're not processing your feelings. You're trying to save everyone despite the danger to yourself. And so I think we really have to get away from that rhetoric. Damn, I was raised with work ethic. I used to say, I may not be the smartest kid in medical school class, but I'll outwork all your asses. And same thing with residency. I mean, I think I was just raised with like that innate, if you work hard enough, things will work out. And what I've realized, if you work hard enough, you will burn yourself out. Sometimes it's not about like grinding and grinding and grinding. Sometimes it's about the pauses and like stepping back and letting some time pass. Because I mean, there's been so many times that I've like hit my head against the brick wall trying to make things happen, when it was like you just needed to stand back and be like, oh, maybe you need to go a different way. Giving yourself permission to try something different, giving yourself permission to look at it in a different perspective, giving yourself permission to say no, giving yourself permission to rest, I think is huge.
Hey, folks, thanks for joining us for the 100th episode of the Change Physician podcast. We were excited for the journey that we've had over the last year, and we are extremely excited for the journey ahead. We hope that you join us for this transition here as we start delving into what makes us tick and how best that you can start to work on yourself using the skills, mindsets, and strategies from words of wisdom from the past, words of wisdom from the future, some fabulous upcoming guests that we have. It's going to be an awesome journey. Looking forward to seeing you. See you at thechangedphysician.com.
See ya.